The board date is fixed, the integration is not, and half the room is pretending those facts can coexist. Welcome to your project kickoff meeting. Marketing does X, engineering hits Y, sales lands Z. Nobody says anything useful for longer than anyone is paying attention. The entire gathering is theater. Your team has already run the real meeting. They ran it in Slack direct messages late on Thursday night. They ran it again in the parking lot after the sprint review. You were not invited to any of those conversations. The findings from those shadow channels are incredibly accurate. Your team has successfully named the vendor dependency that will slip. They know exactly why the Q3 deadline makes the rest of your plan dishonest. The data exists, and it is correct. It is simply never going to reach you. Your team maintains this informal, parallel timeline because the formal meeting offers zero protection for honesty. Relying on these secret channels is a survival strategy. By the time you sit down in that boardroom, the official pre-mortem has already happened. Your challenge as a leader isn't finding the information. Your challenge is that the people who hold the truth have calculated exactly what telling it to you will cost them. Naming a risk inside an organization is not a free action. It carries a specific, invisible price. We can call this the speech tax. In most corporate structures, the moment you point out a fatal flaw, you absorb a label. You are suddenly viewed as negative, not a team player. You become permanently associated with the problem itself, rather than recognized as the person trying to solve it. Organizations separate these two identities with brutal efficiency. The person who smiles and commits to the impossible timeline gets promoted. The expert who highlights the failing infrastructure gets reassigned. The higher this tax becomes, the quieter the experts get. Once the experts go quiet, decisions roll forward entirely on inertia and forced optimism. The outcomes get worse, so the penalty for being associated with those outcomes rises. Corporate silence is an engineered outcome. Organizations systematically train their employees to withhold the truth through thousands of small, observable career punishments enacted over years. To see how destructive this mechanism gets at the state level, look at the collapse of the German payment processor Wirecard. From 2015 to 2020, journalists at the Financial Times and a dedicated line of short sellers ran a continuous, very public pre-mortem on the company. Their findings, mapping out Wirecard's massive fraud, were entirely correct. BaFin, the German financial regulator, responded to this data, but instead of investigating Wirecard, they opened criminal investigations against the journalists who named the risk. The market watched this violent enforcement of the speech tax from the top down. Experts drew the obvious conclusion and stayed quiet. Then, Wirecard collapsed exactly as predicted. Formal risk mapping can work, but it requires a very specific environment. Consider the aftermath of the 2008 banking crisis and the collapse of institutions like Bear Stearns. To prevent a repeat, the Federal Reserve instituted CCAR, the Comprehensive Capital Analysis and Review. It is a strict stress testing regime that requires major banks to model their own failure modes in writing and submit the results to the government. CCAR works because an external authority pays the speech tax for everyone in the room. The cost of hiding a risk, facing severe capital restrictions, dividend blocks, or failing the test entirely, is suddenly infinitely more expensive than the internal awkwardness of naming it. Accurate risk data depends entirely on whether an outside force prices honesty higher than internal silence. It has very little to do with founder charisma or generic culture. Are you rewarding the truth, or are you the executive the truth is actively being kept from? Let's run a quick audit. First, grab a notebook. Write down the names of every employee who has privately warned you, over coffee or in a direct message, that a specific part of your latest initiative is going to fail. Next to each name, write down the exact career penalty they would pay if they repeated that same warning out loud in tomorrow's steering committee. Would they miss a promotion cycle? Would they lose their seat on the cross-functional team? Now write down the exact phrases your leadership uses to shut these people down. Not a team player. Off the bus. Focus on solutions, not problems. Those phrases are the actual invoice for the speech tax. Questioning a layer 1 risk, like a CEO's public promise, carries a terminal career cost. The penalty exists in a zone far beyond simple social awkwardness. Here is the actual test of your leadership. At the start of your next team meeting, list 3 distinct ways your own decisions could sink the project. Then, refuse to move the agenda forward until your team does the same. Truth in business is a strict economic exchange. If you refuse to pay the tax for honesty, Your team will simply take the project's actual fate and safely lock it away in their direct messages.